Welcome to episode 2 of the book review series with Seek and Evolve.
It's great to be back.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos.
A really well-known book.
Definitely. And, in our modern world, we're just constantly bombarded with information, aren't we?
Oh, absolutely. It's overwhelming sometimes.
And finding truly grounded, actionable wisdom, that can feel like searching for a signal in just this vast, noisy universe. So our mission today is really to cut through that noise. We want to distill the most profound and practical nuggets of insight from this book.
Sort of give you a shortcut, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A valuable shortcut to being well-informed without feeling overwhelmed. We want to pull out the main concepts, the actionable steps, and, well, some surprising scientific stuff, too.
Yeah, the science is fascinating, all to empower you, the listener, to live with more clarity, intention, and purpose.
Which ties right into our Seek and Evolve mission.
Absolutely. And this book, it's by Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, a clinical psychologist, professor. It didn't just appear out of thin air.
No,
it kind of grew organically from these popular online maxims he wrote about living well. It came from noticing that people aren't just chasing, fleeting happiness.
they want something more.
Yeah, exactly. People are genuinely hungry for deeper meaning, purpose. So the book really acts as this comprehensive guide for navigating that complex interplay between order and chaos in life.
Order and chaos, we'll definitely get into that.
And he frames existence itself, not just as material things, but as a drama, a living, breathing drama.
That's a powerful way to put it. And he jumps right in, doesn't he? Rule number 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back.
Right off the bat.
Now, okay, on the surface, that sounds like, just posture advice your mom gave you.
Yeah, pretty much.
But Peterson grounds this in some really surprising science involving lobsters. Did I read that right?
You did. Lobsters.
Oh.
It sounds strange, but it's how he illustrates this really fundamental biological truth.
Okay, tell us about the lobsters.
Right. So lobsters, they have these incredibly simple nervous systems, simple enough that scientists have actually mapped their neural circuits pretty precisely.
Okay.
And despite being, simple, they have these dominance hierarchies.
Yeah.
And get this, they've existed for over 350 million years.
Wow, 350 million. Older than dinosaurs.
Way older. And here's the kicker. Serotonin levels and lobsters are directly tied to their status.
Serotonin, like the mood chemical in humans.
Exactly the same chemical. If a lobster wins a fight, its serotonin goes up, it gets more confident, postures more dominantly.
If it loses.
Serotonin plummets, it becomes less confident, stressed, hunches over. Its health actually suffers visibly.
That's wild. I read somewhere that a defeated lobster's brain can actually dissolve and regrow differently.
Yeah, it's that intense. The brain can basically reconfigure itself for a subordinate role. It's a profound biological response to status change.
Okay, so the human connection. It's not just a metaphor then. We have similar wiring.
We absolutely do. Low serotonin in humans. It's strongly linked with lower perceived social standing, and it drops after defeat or, chronic stress.
And that shows up as?
Well, less happiness, more sensitivity to pain, anxiety, getting sick more often, and potentially even a shorter lifespan over time.
But higher status, higher serotonin.
Correlates with more confidence, calmness, better ability to think long-term, plan for the future.
So stand up straight. It's way more than just posture.
Much more. Peterson calls it a metaphysical acceptance of the burden of being. It's like a deep physiological signal. You're telling yourself and the world that you're willing to face life voluntarily, head on.
Shifting from bracing for disaster to meeting a challenge.
Precisely. It changes your whole neurochemistry.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense biologically. And this idea of facing life head on brings us to those core concepts you mentioned, order and chaos.
Yes. He argues these aren't just abstract ideas. They're like the fundamental building blocks of how we experience reality.
So how does he define them? What is chaos?
Imagine chaos as everything you don't know, unexplored territory. It's ignorance, but also possibility. The formless potential, like in Genesis 1, where everything emerges from.
Yeah. Okay. Potential, but maybe scary potential.
Definitely. Symbolically, it's often linked to the feminine, both creative and nurturing, but also potentially overwhelming, destructive.
And order.
Order is the opposite. It's the known world, explored territory, structure, hierarchy, society's rules, tradition, predictability, what we understand and can manage.
But order isn't purely good either, is it?
No, that's the crucial point. Order can become too rigid, one-sided. It can turn into tyranny, stifling growth, crushing the individual.
Right. And this is where it gets really compelling for me. He brings in this Taoist idea That meaning isn't found purely in order or purely in chaos.
Exactly. It's found right on the border, the edge between the two.
Walking that line.
Yeah. To walk that border means constantly navigating the edge of what you know, taking in just enough novelty, just enough challenge to adapt and grow, but without getting completely overwhelmed by the unknown.
That's the sweet spot.
That's what he calls the divine way. It's where life feels intense, gripping, and truly meaningful. And he argues this isn't just a nice idea, it's a deep response from our neurologically grounded instinctive self.
It connects to growth too, doesn't it? This idea of limitations.
Totally. Think about Superman. When he had infinite powers, he got kind of boring, right?
Yeah, no stakes.
Exactly. Real heroism, real meaning comes from pushing against limitation, overcoming obstacles. So for Peterson to truly be means you have to be constantly becoming, transforming.
Which means accepting suffering and vulnerability are part of the deal.
They're not bugs, they're features. They're intrinsic to existing and absolutely necessary for real growth, which again fits right into that seek and evolve idea of continuous growth.
It really does. Okay, so these are big ideas. How do we actually apply them? He offers some really practical, almost surprisingly basic steps, doesn't he? Starting with sleep and breakfast.
Yeah, his clinical advice is super direct on this. Get a consistent wake-up time every day. Doesn't matter when you went to bed.
Regardless of bedtime, okay.
Yeah. And eat a breakfast that's heavy on fat and protein pretty soon after you wake up.
Why those two things specifically?
It sounds simple, but he stresses how crucial they are for stabilizing your circadian rhythms and your blood sugar. For people whose lives feel chaotic or out of control, just doing these two things can massively help regulate anxiety and depression.
Just by providing that basic biological stability.
It can bring symptoms down to subclinical levels sometimes. It's foundational.
That's powerful. It shows how our biology underpins our mental state. Speaking of things getting out of control, let's talk about those destructive positive feedback loops.
Oh yeah, those are insidious. Like microphone feedback at a concert, right? That piercing shriek that just gets louder and louder.
Right. How does that play out in life?
Well, addiction is a classic example. Someone drinks to maybe numb anxiety.
Okay.
But then the withdrawal makes the anxiety worse, which makes them want to drink more. It spirals.
Creates a worse problem.
Definitely. Or agoraphobia. Someone avoids a crowded place because it makes them anxious. They feel relief by avoiding it.
It reinforces the fear.
Exactly. It tells the brain, see, that place was dangerous. So the world feels more frightening, and their own safe space just shrinks and shrinks. Understanding these loops is the first step to breaking them.
Yeah, you have to see the pattern, and that really brings us to Rule 8. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. This feels central.
Hugely central. And it's not just about lying to others. It's fundamentally about being honest with yourself.
What does he mean by the life lie?
It's when you deliberately manipulate reality or your perception of it based on some narrow outcome you want. You twist things to fit your desires.
Why is that bad, apart from being dishonest?
Because it leads to distorted thinking. You stop seeing things clearly. And almost always, it means you fail to actually get the results you really need or intend. It comes from arrogance, really believing your current knowledge is enough and reality needs to bend to you.
And he also talks about sins of omission, not just actively lying, but letting things slide.
Yeah, letting bad things happen when you could step in, staying silent when you should speak up. He argues that can be just as damaging, just as consequential as actively doing something wrong.
So if lying twists reality and makes things worse, truth must do the opposite.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He says truthful, precise speech actually brings forth a habitable world from chaos.
How so?
By defining things clearly, naming them. It simplifies reality. If you define a problem accurately, you can start to manage it, instead of being overwhelmed by this vague, amorphous dread.
Like shining a light in a dark room.
Exactly. He warns about hiding Beatty monsters under the carpet, those small problems you ignore. They fester. They grow huge in the dark.
Until they're genuinely scary.
Right. And there's science backing this up, too. Remember those inattentional blindness experiments?
The gorilla walking through the basketball game?
That's the one. Or the person switching behind the counter. It shows how what we aim at, our goals, our values, literally filters what we perceive.
So if you aim for something better,
you'll start to see things differently. Opportunities, solutions, pathways that were invisible before because you weren't looking for them. Clarifying your mind really does let you live more purposefully.
What you aim at determines what you see. That's profound. Okay, shifting gears to relationships. Rule 3. Make friends with people who want the best for you.
Sounds like obvious advice, maybe.
A little, yeah. But he adds depth to it.
He does. Friendship, in his view, is a reciprocal deal. It's not about blind loyalty no matter what.
So it's okay to be selective.
He argues it's not just okay, it's necessary. It's not selfish to choose people who genuinely support your upward aim, as he calls it, your growth.
Why are those friendships so important?
Because those friends encourage your good habits, they celebrate when you succeed, and crucially, they'll call you out when you mess up. They provide that corrective feedback.
And the opposite type of friendship.
People who aren't aiming up, or worse, people who resent your progress, they can drag you down. Subtly, maybe, but powerfully. Their negativity, maybe jealousy, can undermine your own efforts.
What about resentment itself? That feeling, he says it's a signal.
A really important one. His take is that resentment signals one of two things. Either it's your own immaturity, in which case you need to suck it up and get on with it, or it signals genuine tyranny. You're actually being oppressed, silenced, taken advantage of.
And if it's tyranny?
Then the book argues you have a moral obligation to speak up. Silence is a form of lying, and tyranny, he says, feeds on lies. It poisons your life and the whole situation.
So speaking truth isn't just personal, it's a social responsibility.
In this view, yes. It ties back to that seek and evolve idea of empowering transformation, not just accepting things.
Okay, this leads us naturally to Rule 5, which I suspect might be quite provocative for some listeners. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them.
Yeah, that one definitely raises eyebrows.
What's the core idea there?
It's about parental responsibility. He argues parents need to act as merciful proxies for the real world.
Meaning
You have to teach your kids the rules, make them socially desirable, competent, so they can function well out there for their own good.
He uses that Sleeping Beauty analogy, right?
Yeah, the idea that overprotecting her, removing all danger, just made her weak and totally unprepared for real life, for suffering, for actual malevolence. Your job as a parent isn't to remove all sharp edges, but to teach kids how to navigate them safely.
So discipline isn't about crushing them, it's about providing structure.
Exactly. Paradoxically, creativity often flourishes within limits, not without them. Kids actually seek boundaries, like little chimps testing the limits. They need them to feel secure.
And the science backs this up.
The research is pretty clear, apparently. Kids who aren't socialized reasonably well by age 4 or so really struggle making friends, developing social skills. It sets them up for a much harder time later. Loneliness, antisocial behavior, depression.
He addresses physical punishment directly, too, which is obviously controversial.
He does. The source argues that some behaviors are so immediately dangerous, like a toddler about to stick a fork in a socket or run into traffic, that they require immediate, absolute stopping.
For safety.
Yes. And in those extreme cases, the argument goes, a swift physical intervention might be the least costly way to ensure the lesson is learned instantly, preventing a catastrophic outcome. It's about minimizing harm overall. The penalties society imposes for bad behavior only get harsher as you get older, so early lessons are crucial.
It's definitely a pragmatic, maybe even harsh perspective on socialization. Okay, moving beyond the family. Rule 9. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't.
The art of listening, which often feels like a lost art.
Totally. How does he frame it?
He sees genuine conversation as, like, exploration, articulation, even strategizing. He's a fan of Carl Rogers' technique.
Which is?
Where you summarize the other person's ideas back to them accurately to their satisfaction before you even think about replying, making sure you truly get it.
That takes effort.
It does. And he connects this to thinking itself. He suggests real thinking isn't just a monologue in your head. It's more like an internal dialogue, tolerating conflict between different viewpoints inside yourself.
And if you're not good at that internal debate,
then you need to talk. A good listener acts as both collaborator and opponent, helping you organize your own thoughts.
So we kind of outsource our mental organization to others through conversation.
In a way, yeah. A lot of healthy mental function relies on that communication. And society itself is always doing this. People subtly punish and reward behavior constantly, guiding each other towards some shared ideal.
Which brings us to some of the book's critiques of modern ideas and ideologies. He definitely doesn't shy away from controversy here.
No, he doesn't.
So what does he say about things like deconstructionism or the focus on power?
The book acknowledges science can be biased by power, sure, but it argues that reducing everything to only power is dangerous. It potentially justifies using force and ignores evidence or logic.
Okay, and what about the discussion on gender? That's a hot topic.
Yeah. The source critiques what Peterson calls the insane insistence that all gender differences are socially constructed. He finds this problematic, especially contrasting it with, say, the reality of gender reassignment surgery, which suggests something deeper at play.
Does he offer evidence?
He points to data suggesting biological influences on gender differences, noting these differences often seem most pronounced in very egalitarian societies, like Scandinavia, where you'd expect social construction effects to be minimized. It highlights for him inconsistencies in purely social constructionist views.
The book also mentions a kind of anti-human sentiment, using examples like a TEDx talk or the Columbine shooters.
Yes, it touches on the danger of viewing humanity itself as a plague or a cancer, how that kind of presupposition can lead to nihilism, or worse.
And connects this to struggles faced particularly by boys and men.
Right. The source highlights stats about boys falling behind in education, challenges in forming relationships. It notes, for example, women outnumbering men in many university fields, and the societal challenge this poses, pointing out that women often seek competent partners. The decline in stable families, especially father absence, is linked to significantly worse outcomes for children, like increased poverty.
So individual responsibility and competence are key for the collective good.
That's a core theme. It argues these things matter profoundly for societal health.
Okay, let's wrap up by looking at the value he places on tradition and sacrifice, concepts that maybe aren't so popular today.
Right. He argues that a uniquely human breakthrough was discovering delayed gratification. The idea that you could sacrifice something, now work, save, follow rules for a bigger reward later.
That required seeing the future as real.
Exactly. He even frames the future poetically as a judgmental father who watches what you do now, connecting actions to consequences.
And he specifically discusses Christianity's role here, calling its impact a miracle.
Yes, the source emphasizes Christianity's elevation of the individual soul, making everyone equal before God and the law, slave, master, everyone. That was revolutionary compared to previous hierarchical societies.
Rejecting things like infanticide, valuing women.
Yes, and establishing a separation between church and state so rulers weren't gods. But importantly, the source also includes strong critiques.
Like from Nietzsche.
Yeah, Nietzsche argued that focusing only on salvation through faith devalued this life, encouraged passivity. And Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor is presented as a critique of how institutional religion itself could become tyrannical.
So it's complex.
Very. Peterson's argument, though, is that the very spirit of truth and individual conscience fostered by Christianity eventually led people to question its own rigid dogma. This contributed to the death of God in the West, creating a vacuum that, he argues, dangerous ideologies like communism and fascism tried to fill.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to unpack from one book. So pulling it all together, what's the main takeaway for us?
Well, this deep dive really hammers home a central message, I think. Finding meaning, navigating that chaos. It's not about waiting for external fixes. It's about taking responsibility, acting truthfully, disciplined self-improvement.
It really emphasizes that individual transformation is the key, the foundation for any kind of collective flourishing.
Absolutely. And that aligns so well with our whole seek and evolve mission, nurturing the body, clarifying the mind, balancing emotion, awakening that energy for change.
Yeah, engaging with these ideas, even the challenging ones, gives you knowledge to live with more clarity, more intention, more purpose. It's a call to courage, isn't it?
It really is. Individual courage and responsibility.
Okay, so here's a final, maybe provocative thought for you, our listener, to consider. The book implies that if you fail to make the right sacrifices now, if you fail to reveal yourself honestly, if you don't live truthfully, you weaken yourself. And that leads not just to external problems, but to this deep self-inflicted suffering, like a personal hell you create.
Hit the flip side.
The flip side is that courageous, truthful words and actions, even small ones, start to build a better reality, a simpler, more habitable world around you. So that personal journey of improvement, it's ongoing. It's never really done.
See you again on Seek and Evolve for more education and growth.